abandoned temple. What the hell was that? Nemala questioned herself as she darted through the forest. Its hazy early morning fog aided in camouflaging her earthy skin into the tree. She slowed somewhat, cautiously listening to determine the direction she should run. It wasn't hard for Micah to catch her scent, despite having never traveled this far into the dark forest. Compared against the gamey, damp scent wafting around him, the woman's scent was otherworldly. She smelled of a warm summer night, with hints of citrus. Micah sniffed the air again. A low rumble rattled the golden scales that laid just under his pecs. His large hand moved to his ribs. Not sure how to feel about this new ability. Avians didn't purr. That was a well-known fact. But this discovery would have to wait. Finding her was of greater importance. The sound of a branch snapping made Micah swing his massive forearm to the left, forcefully slapping away the threat that whipped at him. A few seconds later, another whip-like vine darted out again, missing him by an inch, while a few more slithered along the dead discarded leaves blanketing the forest floor, masking themselves among the gnarled roots. But Micah could sense the killing intent aimed at him. Micah swiftly summoned forth his inner power, lifting the golden scales that adorned his body into defensive armor, transforming his fingers into scythes and his wings into deadly sickles. Slice! Bam! 3 more vines darted towards him, aiming for his vital points. One to the head, another to the heart, and the last towards his spine. But Micah rolled his body, spiraling and slicing anything within his path. 3 vines soon became 6. But Micah once again evaded, cutting the heinously persistent tree insect with downward sweeps of his wing.
Curse you, foul creature!
Micah poured his power into his eyes, forcing his eye pupils to split and reshape themselves into his more beast-like form. Doing so allowed his perception to heighten. He looked over the trees within his range, scanning all of them for the even slightest variation. Towards the northeast corner was where he finally spotted it. It looked like an overgrown stick bug. If not for its arm-like protuberance and eerie bark-covered face, he would have overlooked it. These beings were dwellers of the deep forest.
Just how far have I fallen?
Micah was in unfamiliar terrain around him. Sure, he and his knights order hunted in the outer edges of the forest. Sometimes they even flew over the eastern valley towards the obsidian mines. But none had ever dared to fly over the heart of the forest, near the border of the volcanic sea. For this was where the dark dwellers and true demons reigned. There was a disturbance in the air and an unnerving silence. It's too quiet here, Nemala muttered to herself. Not even the insects dared to cry out. So she also silenced herself. The faint rustling and movement in the trees above was her only warning before a sinister barbed leg jabbed the tree trunk centimeters away from her throat. Tree particles and wood splinters exploded around her as Nemala used the trees as a barrier to evade the onslaught of swift strikes. 5, 6, 7, 8. Nemala counted the legs of the creature before rolling headfirst down a muddy embankment. Screech! The spider-like creature wailed in frustration as it lost sight of her. Nemala peeked her head out to assess if there was only one solitary threat, only to witness the true face of her attacker. It had the long dark hair and the upper face of a female, but that was where the similarities ended. It screeched again, snapping its venom, dripping mandibles in the air. Nemala ducked back down and forced herself deeper into the crevice of the embankment, hoping the giant arachnid would scamper back whence it came. Without a weapon, she would be forced to use her power. But there was no guarantee this spider-like creature would be defeated by just that. Micah didn't wait for the insect to attack again. Instead, he bounded upwards, then flapped his one usable wing, vibrating it rapidly like an iron mason's saw. No matter how many times the tree demon whipped its deathly vines, they were instantly shredded before they could deal Micah any harm. When it realized its death was imminent, It attempted to uproot itself from the ground but failed. Micah punched his fist through the heart of the insect's chest with a mighty roar, then forcefully split its log-shaped body down the center, while huffing and exhaling in exhaustion. For it had only been an hour from the time that he had awoken from his feverish sleep. If he was at his full strength, this fight would have been nothing more than a child's tussle. But he was forced to take his time because of his busted wing. Micah grimaced as a fiery sensation pulsed through his body, forcing him to kneel upon the cold, damp ground. The outer edges of his vision began to darken.
No.
He growled.
I must find her, I must protect her.
But his prayer was cut short as his large frame toppled forward and fell into unconsciousness. Nemala bit her lip as she contemplated her options of escaping. The embankment only went on for a few more meters up ahead. If she left the cover it provided, she would be forced to fight the arachnid head-on. And fighting a giant humanoid spider wasn't too smart, especially empty-handed. A woo. The howl of a wolf caused Nemala's heart to quicken. Just as she began to scooch out from the crevice, the sound of yelps and snarls echoed through the forest. The silver wolves. Nemala quickly pushed herself forward and crawled up the embankment. 6 of the 10 silver wolves were attacking the giant spider. Their massive jaws clamped down tightly on the beast's barbed legs. With every attack, the barbs would pierce through the muzzles. But they persisted on gnawing and ripping as many legs as they could, sacrificing themselves one after another. No, Nemala screamed out as she ran towards the fight. The surrounding air vibrated and shone in a mist of purple and indigo. Sidus Ignis, Starfire. The incantation rolled off her tongue like the name of an old friend. Nemala looked at her hands, unsure where the sudden memory came from, but it felt right. So she spoke it aloud and pushed her powers out as she chanted it again, Sidus Ignis. Whoosh! A brilliant light shot out from her hands, shrouding the entire area in scorching starlight. The trees and embers within the light's path were nothing more than ashen embers. Move now, Nemala screamed at the silver wolves fighting by her side. With no need for another warning, they released the arachnid. Then Nemala pushed her powers forward, concentrating the star beam on the face and torso of the arachnid, reducing the hideous creature to nothing more than a smoldering pile of burnt flesh. Splash! Nemala tasted the blood before she felt it spill out of her mouth. Her body lurched forward as she gripped her heart. A piercing pain throbbed in her chest and skull, rendering her helpless. The silver wolves whimpered and cried as she writhed on the ground in agony. The alpha of the pack nudged her with the tip of his nose, but whimpered when her head lolled to the side, revealing her blooded mouth and nose. Rough growling, he barked at another wolf behind him. Then off that wolf ran back towards the northern side of the forest. Micah sniffed the air, then tried to swat away the foul-smelling liquid splashing on him, sputtering and spitting as he wiped his face.
Is this piss?
Micah punched the ground and rolled onto his knees. A lone silver wolf sat at the side of him, nonchalantly staring at him as if it hadn't just pissed on his face.
I'll skin you and wear you as a hide.
The wolf growled and whimpered, then lowered its upper body and tilted its head towards the south. Micah didn't know what to think of it until he smelled Nemala's fragrance and the faint metallic scent of blood. His fist clenched as he looked the silver wolf over, slowly recalling the night before. The woman that cared for him was not alone. Could this wolf be one of the other presences he felt? For her scent to be mixed with blood meant she was in danger. Micah rose to his feet and looked the large wolf in its eyes.
Take me to where she is.
The wolf nodded its head in understanding, then took off with Micah close behind. Abandoned Temple Part 2. Micah sprinted through the forest, fueled by sheer determination and an instinctual need to protect. The closer he and the silver wolf drew to Nemala's whereabouts, the more intense the scent of blood became. Micah bore down harder, pushing his feet into the damp air, forcing himself to run faster. The wolf cut left and leaped over the remnants of several broken logs. Micah slowed immediately, observing his surroundings. There was a skirmish here. He picked up a splintered piece of wood off the forest floor, then tossed it aside when several more wolf whimpers were heard nearby. Woo. Micah climbed a small mound and found the woman lying on her side with her back towards him. He hurriedly jogged to her, but was swiftly pushed back by a pack of silver wolves. The one that led him sauntered to what must have been the alpha and rubbed its muzzle against its jaw. The alpha was injured, like many of the other wolves. Its thick silver coat was matted and stained with blood. Micah crouched down and pulled his wings in tight, attempting to make himself seem smaller and less threatening. The wolf lowered its ears. So Micah continued forward, holding his hand out for the wolf to catch his scent. But the wolf simply turned his back and went back to the woman's side, whining and pawing at her unconscious body. Micah assumed that it was okay for him to approach. So he quickened his steps and kneeled down by her. The leaves were stained with blood. So he gently rolled her onto her back, hoping to find the wound from which she was bleeding. But as he rolled her, he soon discovered that trail of dry blood crusted around her nose and mouth.
Has she been poisoned?
Micah questioned the wolves. They all turned their heads towards the alpha, who limped towards the smoldering corpse of a giant arachnid. Micah's eyes opened wide in bewilderment. An arachnid of this size could kill 3 of his best men. Yet she and a handful of wolves could reduce it to nothing more than a pile of kindling. Micah stroked the side of her neck with the backside of his index finger, sighing a breath of relief when a strong pulse of life was felt from her warm skin. She didn't have a fever and her pulse was strong.
She may have sustained some internal injury.
Micah spoke out loud, explaining the situation to himself and the alpha wolf.
We must leave this area.
Micah looked around, turning his head to the left and the right. They were sitting ducks here. But he didn't know this area well enough to find adequate shelter. Micah looked the alpha wolf in the eye while summoning forth his beastly powers, hoping there was some small chance it could bridge the gap between them.
She needs shelter. Can you bring us to a safe place?
The wolf revered him but remained still and stoic. So Micah tried again.
She needs a safe place to rest. Can you help us?
There was nothing but silence. Micah wiped his calloused hands over his face.
They cannot understand you.
A voice purred from over his shoulder. Micah unfurled his wings, placing a barrier over the woman and himself.
Wolves cannot speak our tongue.
The voice purred again. Micah summoned forth his power, increasing his beastly aura.
Who are you? Show yourself.
He yelled out, his voice echoing through the darkening forest.
Will you help her? I've grown to like her somewhat.
Micah's chest rumbled, and a deep, guttural growl burst from his chest.
Will you help us or not, demon?
Misky leaped from the tall branch overhead, her yellow eyes flashing a vibrant golden hue. Micah slowly rose to his feet, watching the cat demon just as closely as she watched him.
What are you?
He questioned. But the demon simply laughed and stretched her back in reply.
I believe the better question is who are you? Follow me. We must leave before the 3 moons sit high in the sky.
Micah couldn't argue with that. So he bent down and cradled the woman in his arms, gently resting her head on his chest. After carefully lowering all of his golden scales in an effort not to accidentally wound her.
Lead the way. I'll make haste.
The black and orange cat demon chuffed, then scampered towards the west side of the forest. Micah glanced down at the woman in his arms, observing how her deep brown skin contrasted his. It felt right holding her close to him like this. He stroked the stubble of his beard against her temple. The woman smiled faintly and nestled herself deeper into the crook of his arm.
If you could wait to groom your mate until we reach our shelter. We could go faster.
Then onwards she ran.
Mate.
Micah's shaft hardened at the idea of bedding her. Would she weep under his embrace, be as fierce as he believed her to be?
Yes, my apologies.
The feline flicked her tail at him, then continued on. As the 3 moons ascended into the violet night sky, their group had finally reached the base of a giant redwood tree. The cat demon sat upon the ground and groomed herself as Micah tilted his head upwards. The tree before him scaled high into the night sky.
How is this possible? Surely a tree this size would have been noticed?
After cleaning itself, the cat placed its legs back on the ground, then eyed Micah with suspicion.
You see only what? That treacherous woman allows you to see.
Micah observed the cat but spoke no further.
Lower her to me,
the feline commanded. Micah bent his knee and held the woman outwards obediently. The cat purred and rubbed itself against the woman's face and arm.
For you have given me a name, so I bless you and grant you permission to enter.
The cat flicked her tail and motioned for Micah to walk forward. Journey within the tunnel of the great tree there. You will find all you have lost, said an ethereal whisper. Micah gathered Nemala back into his arms and boldly stepped within the dark chamber of roots and damp earth. As he looked back, the opening faded from view.
Shit! Have we been tricked?
Micah pulled Nemala closer to him, then spread his wings as best he could to shield her from any potential enemies. But nothing reached them as he meandered the pathway. The only noise to be heard was the soft shuffling of his feet, steadily traveling downwards, following the twisted roots of the great tree, further into the unknown. Around the bend, the faint glow of a greenish light flickered. Micah looked down at the female in his arms and tensed his muscles. There was no choice but to push forward. As he walked towards the exit of the tunnel, a warm breeze washed over him, rustling the debris and sediment underfoot. Micah's eyes darted from one side of the room to the other in utter fascination. Before them was a vast subterranean cavern, full of buildings and what looked like ancient ruins. Several fractured walls were covered in moss and climbing vines and smaller buildings that could have been houses of some sort. Further ahead, in the center of the deserted structures, stood a building that faintly resembled the Temple of the Winged Mother. But instead of the insignia of a winged phoenix, there were 4 statues. In the middle was a man with a great sword and broad shoulders. He looked like a mighty warrior, but his lower body resembled an octopus. Micah's eyes followed the tentacles of the male statue and how its appendages spread out to the 4 females on its adjacent sides. The first tentacle was wrapped around the waist of a statue of a nude flightless woman. Her chest was ample, and her stomach was round as though she were with child. The second tentacle was positioned around the arm of what appeared to be a female demon, though humanoid in appearance. It had cat-like ears and odd-shaped eyes, with a long bushy tail, warmly encircling the tentacle of the male next to it. To the right was another more obscure one. It had the wings and face of an insect. If not for the breast and traditional loincloth worn by avian women adorning its waist, Micah wouldn't have known it was also a female. Unknowingly, Micah had approached the temple. His hands delicately touched the cool marble as he studied the images before him. He rounded the side, stumbling over several broken fragments on the dust-covered ground. Is that a statue of the Winged Mother? Micah's pectorals tensed as he heard the woman in his arm question him. He looked down, warmly staring into the beautiful lilac eyes that gazed up at him. A soft purr echoed through the cavernous space as he gently placed the female on her feet. Micah didn't want to alarm her, so he drew back, tucking his wings neatly behind him in a submissive gesture. Nemala looked at him silently, then questioned him again. Micah opted not to speak. Instead, nodding his head yes, recalling how she acted when she heard his voice before. Nemala nudged the fragments by her feet to the side with interest, then turned and walked back to the front of the monument. There's an inscription here. Can you read it? Micah curiously watched her, but made his way over to see what she was referring to. Her small, slender hand was outstretched, pointing to a cracked slab with ancient writing. Micah could fairly make out a few words, but not the entire text. Some words were worn and faded. Others used characters he couldn't translate. Nemala looked at him again, waiting for him to answer. Micah observed her again, then tapped his mouth, gesturing for permission to speak. She took a deep breath as if she had to ready herself, then nodded her head.
According to what I can read here.
The woman shifted her stance in his peripheral, but Micah continued.
Bless the Great Father and the foremothers from his seed.
The female wrapped her arms around herself, but Micah once again ignored her movements.
His seed bore fruit to bless each kingdom. I apologize. I'm unable to read the rest.
By the time he finished reading, Nemala's face was flushed red. He could feel his shaft throbbing from the scent of her arousal, so he placed his hands on top of his trousers and turned his back to her. Knowing she would either run or be offended by his mutual attraction. Nemala studied the male before her once again. He was at least 2 heads taller than her, and Nemala wasn't little herself. Compared to the enslaved women, she was a giantess. Her eyes squinted as she silently assessed the situation. My body instinctively reacts to him. Your voice must contain some power. Nemala placed her hands upon her hips, then questioned him, have you bewitched me? Micah turned around abruptly at her accusation.
Have I what?
His soul-jerking laughter caused his manhood to bounce around as his shoulders quaked. Nemala clenched her fist as her essence gushed down the triangular crevice of her thighs. Micah's laughter ceased. She was serious, so he, too, would approach this matter with sincerity. Instead of hiding his erection away, he stood tall, letting his penis stand to show her just how much she was affecting him.
You say I have bewitched you? Then what of this?
Nemala rocked back and forth, seeking to relieve the rhythmic clenching between her folds. Her eyes fixated on the large phallus teeping the lower half of his tunic. The longer she gazed at it, the more damp spot near his bulbous head became. Micah followed her eyes and gripped his shaft, watching as her nipples hardened for him. He groaned as his hand gripped this swollen girth.
If I bewitched you, would my cock weep like this, begging to be plunged into your folds?
Nemala didn't break her eye contact with his penis but still answered, I don't even remember how to do it, or if I ever bedded a man. Micah's shaft grew even harder at the thought of being her first. His husky voice was riddled with lust.
That is of no concern to me. I can show you.
Nemala stepped forward. Her chest rose and fell in excitement. Everything in her and around her wanted this man. She could feel her power dancing on the lips of her labia, beckoning her to become one with the being before her. I don't even know your name. Micah closed the gap between them while passionately pulling her body flush to his. His hardened shaft nestled snugly underneath the junction of her breast. His large hands cupped the delicate lines of her neck as his breath mixed with hers.
My name is Micah. What is yours?
He whispered into her mouth as he teased her lips with a gentle kiss. Nemala's hands glided upwards, sliding over the glimmering golden scales covering his chest, slowly encircling the hardened dark nipples on his chest. His body trembled under her touch. Micah arched his back, thrusting his hips slightly, seeking to gain relief from his weeping cock. Nemala's eyes hazed over as the sweet, musky smell of his pre-cum tantalized her senses.
Nemala.
Micah grinned and kissed her forehead.
Nemala, may I bed you?
She took a step back and looked up at Micah. If we do this, it means nothing. Nemala knew her words were harsh, but it couldn't be helped. She still had questions that required too many answers. Bedding him was nothing more than an instinctual need. Micah chuckled, then lifted her into his hands while simultaneously removing her gown from over her head. Deeper into the temple, they walked, as Nemala passionately mated her tongue with his, tracing his forelips with the tip of her tongue, teasing and coaxing him to do the same.
Nemala.
Micah moaned into her mouth as he sat on the altar in the desolate temple, possessively lowering her legs to straddle his lap. Nemala threw her head back as he suckled her chocolate mounds, tenderly biting her stiff peaks.
It may hurt at first, but I promise to be as gentle as I can.
Micah whispered into her cleavage. But Nemala was too lost in pleasure to respond. Micah then lifted her slightly, aligning his shaft to her opening. With a hard kiss, he thrust forward, burying all 13 inches into her quivering core. Nemala screamed as her hands gripped and clawed at his wings. With every upward motion, he spread her open further, stretching her to accommodate his throbbing girth. Her body was no longer hers to command, as it squeezed and milked his cock, coaxing him to spill his seed.
Yes,
roared Micah as her hips discovered their own rhythm, slapping and bucking against his thighs with every rise and fall. Both of their bodies were thrumming with power. Wispy golden and purple swirls of energy washed over them as their flesh and fluids mingled and mated. A bolt of pleasure zapped through Nemala's core as her orgasm hit. Micah's penis was held captive by her vagina's vice-like grip, causing his wings to whoosh open. He leaped into the air, thrusting frantically into her greedy cunt. Blow for the blow. He fed her as much cock as she could take. As he glided through the temple, slapping his hips against hers, he wanted to engrave himself into her flesh, dominate every aspect of her sexuality. Micah. Nemala moaned his name, and he became undone, spilling his seed deep within her core. The heritage. The ruins that sat in total silence for generations were now bathed in the sound of laughter and lust-filled moans. For in the space, they worshipped each other's bodies. Nemala rolled off the top of Micah, panting as her sweat-drenched tresses clung to her neck. She slapped his chest as she nudged him over to make room for her to lie on the altar. I don't think I can take a 7th round. Nemala breathed an exhausted sigh. Micah chuckled and punched the air.
Praise the fates. I was sure your goal was to break my cock.
Nemala couldn't help the bubble of laughter that followed his comment. It was true. After her first orgasm, she became rather insatiable. It took 6 more rounds for her libido to cool down. Micah looked at the beautiful brown goddess beside him and knew he had to do everything within his power to make her his. What do you think this place is? Nemala sat up, looking at the pictographs and hieroglyphics that decorated the walls. Micah kicked his legs to the side of the altar and stepped down, then grabbed their discarded clothing from the temple floor. After shaking off a bit of dust, he handed Nemala her garment.
This is definitely a temple. But to what god I am uncertain.
Nemala thanked him and dressed, then walked to the back of the temple, where a large golden gilded door was partially open. Then we must search for answers. Would you like to explore? With a nod, they set off, scrounging and searching through every inch of every structure, laughing and talking as they diligently seeked out more information. Soon, a small pile of artifacts turned into a substantial heap of long-lost treasures. "I've found another gem-covered goblet." Nemala tossed it in with the 14 others she found in the houses near the temple. Micah flew down beside her, placing what had to be the 50th sword to the pile of weapons at his feet.
This makes very little sense.
Micah flapped his wings in frustration.
To leave all this behind.
He turned and gestured to the ruins behind them. Nemala felt the same way. It's as if the entire city just vanished without a trace. But I have an idea. Nemala wiped her hands and sat down on the hard brown step a few feet from the pile of treasures. Micah joined her, wanting to hear her hypothesis. Look over there. Nemala's small brown hands pointed towards the temple statue. From what you read on the slab of the temple, bless the Great Father and the foremothers from his seed, they birth the 4 kingdoms something or another. Micah nodded for her to continue. And if we know the 4th female statue is the winged mother's statue, we could presume that there are at least 3 more mothers, right? Micah gripped his knuckles as an unnerving itch festered just under his skin.
If what you're saying is true, it would mean everything the Avians believe is a lie.
Avians, are you not winged angel or demons? Micah looked at Nemala as if he had sucked on a lime, then broke out in a deep-barreled laugh.
Angels, demons. I've heard rumors that the flightless refer to our kind as such. But I didn't believe it.
Nemala shrugged and leaned backward, fluffing one of his long white feathers with her fingertips. Is it really that unbelievable? Just look at how the Fire Tribe's people are treated. Micah's laughter died down as he took her words into consideration. From the flightless point of view, the Avians would appear to be quite evil and sinister. So Micah felt inclined to explain.
From hatchlings, we are taught that the great phoenix is the mighty winged mother, the one true goddess. Born from the ashes of the great volcano sporting fiery wings. Her children, the Avians, were created through her love and great sacrifice. But some sought the great mother's power for themselves, and for this, they were punished. Stripped of their memories and privileges. Cursed with hair as red as the great sea of lava as a reminder of their sinner heritage.
Nemala sat back, analyzing Micah's words. Do you know of the great father the Fire Tribe prays to? Micah shook his head in denial. Nemala went on to explain what the elders had taught her. Both of them soon realized the hypocrisy and fallacy of each tale. Micah stood and paced back and forth in contemplation.
What if the Great Father did, in fact, have a relationship with the Fire Queen, the winged mother sister, just as the flightless believe?
Nemala shook her head in agreement. The monument at the temple would certainly support that. But the images and drawings throughout the ruins also depict him being a loving husband to the other 3 females as well. Micah clapped his hands.
Yes, most likely they were all his wives.
Excited energy coursed through the air as they both weaved together a tale of lost kingdoms. Nemala lifted a jeweled necklace from the treasure pile and placed it on her neck. While lazily strolling over to the broken-down fountain at the bottom of the steps. Dancing to the silent melody in her head.
What if the winged mother grew jealous? Viciously slaughtering the other wives and enslaving the descendants of her sister. The one she hated the most.
Micah stretched out his palm and graciously approached Nemala, offering his hand to dance with her to the non-existent ballad, dipping and lifting her to the rhythmic sound of their thoughts.
Looks like you have some understanding,
purred Miski as she sauntered down the top of a vine-covered pillar. When Nemala saw her cat friend's familiar orange and black fur, her face lit up. Miski. The feline meowed and made its way to Nemala's side, rubbing and wiping itself against Nemala's leg. Micah stood off to the side, guardedly watching as the 2 of them finished their greetings. Never in all of his 28 years had he seen a beast befriend someone other than its own kindred. The creature's disposition wasn't normal. But since it led them to these ruins, it must know of the truth he was seeking. If she wanted to pretend to be an ally, Micah knew he would also have to play his part.
Beast, you brought us here for a reason. What is it you seek?
Nemala peered at Micah, mouth slightly hanging open in awe. Watching as he chuffed and purred in some sort of feline language. When Miski replied, Nemala was awestruck. The pair continued on, exchanging grunts and growls for several minutes, causing Nemala to hold her hands up in exasperation. I'm lost, since when did he speak feline? Isn't he an avian? But the pair were too enthralled in their conversation to sense Nemala's growing frustration. Nemala could tell that whatever they were discussing was quite serious. Micah's body language changed when Miski purred and slapped the cobblestone path with her thick black tail. Micah made another retort, then clenched his jaw, fighting back the urge to continue the verbal sparring match with the feisty feline in front of him. The thick veins in his throat bulged and flexed as he tried, but failed to contain his emotions.
What are you saying, beast? Is this some sort of game to you?
Nemala was flustered by the sudden aggressive shift in energy and quickly placed herself between Miski and Micah. What is going on? Micah, tell me something. The muscles on Micah's back tensed as his wings snapped open and shut at the sound of Nemala saying his name. His face only softened when his luminous orbs stared into Nemala's calming lilac eyes. He drew a deep breath, releasing the tension from his body to calm the surge of power bubbling under the surface. Micah. What's going on? Nemala placed her hand on his heart, gently massaging his pectorals with her soft brown hands. Hoping to soothe the angry giant, Micah placed his large, calloused hand atop hers and squeezed gently before speaking.
She asked me how it felt to be home.
His voice cracked with emotion as he broke their eye contact and focused on the deserted ruins around them. Nemala swiftly turned to Miski, bending down to look her feline friend in the eyes. Are you able to talk to me as well, Miski? The large cat chuffed and purred. Nemala looked back at Micah for translation. He shook his head no.
She says she can understand you, but she's unable to speak your mother tongue in this form.
Miski growled softly, then flicked her tail to the side. Micah nodded his head, then continued to translate.
She wants us to follow her.
Nemala wiped her hands on the tattered remnants of her gown, then rose with the help of Micah's outstretched hand. Should we follow? Nemala worriedly asked. After their lovemaking, he shared many things with her. His anger towards King Peacock and his sadness over leaving his loved ones behind. But beyond all, his desire to find out where he truly belonged overshadowed everything. For his truth to be laid upon his lap so suddenly made Nemala suspicious. The timing of all this just seems so bizarre, Nemala whispered as she leaned forward on her tiptoes, softly kissing the prickly stubble on Micah's chin. Micah also looked a bit perplexed.
It seems rather methodical.
He whispered into her hair as he wrapped his arms around her, pulling her closer.
Can this demon be trusted, Nemala?
Micah spoke in a hushed tone. Nemala shrugged while sauntering away, then kneeled down close to Miski. The feline's fluffy black and orange coat tickled her nose as Nemala whispered in her ear. I like you, dear girl. But if you plan to harm either him or myself, I'll kill you. Then wipe my tears with your beautiful fur. The feline arched its back and swiped its heavy clawed paw towards Nemala's face at her throat. But Nemala was quicker and evaded the cat's swift strike. Then, with a flick of her wrist, the overgrown feline was snatched up by the scruff of its neck as if it was nothing more than a naughty kitten. Micah had moved closer, readying himself if Nemala needed his strength, making sure he didn't impede upon her authority. Tisk, that wasn't very nice, dear kitten. Nemala shook the large cat in her grasp. The claws of its hind legs scratched and marred the cobblestone as it desperately tried to gain its footing. But Nemala persisted. What is your aim? The cat went limp. Suddenly, the air around the trio hummed with energy. Whirls of pink and white mana danced over Nemala's skin and fluffed Micah's wings. Nemala quickly threw the cat down. Then Micah shielded them under his wings. Clap. 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 Slow, cynical laughter followed the sound of clapping.
Well, great nephew, I dare say, you found yourself one hell of a mate. If I didn't know any better, I'd say she had some feline blood in her.
Nemala squinted at the nude woman standing before her. She was slender but fit. Her honey-colored curves showed a subtle hint of refined muscle. Between her small pert breast and junction of her thighs sat small tufts of orange and black hair. Nemala's eyes moved upwards when the ears atop the feline woman's long black hair flicked in an alert manner, causing the three of them to turn their heads towards the tunnel entrance.
As much as I would love to explain further, I'd beseech you all to hide, now.
The feline woman pounced upon the vine-covered balcony overhead, then scampered from roof to roof, fleeing deeper into the city of ruins, leaving Nemala and Micah behind. Micah looked at Nemala with a head nod. She understood his intentions. He gripped her tight, then flew into the air, quickly retreating to the upper region of the subterranean city. where overhead tree roots and vines could conceal them. Seconds later, the ground shook violently, dust and rubble fell from several broken buildings. Then ear-piercing screeches bounced and echoed off every wall. Whatever was drawing near was barreling down the tunnel with indescribable speed. Boom! As a man-sized centipede crashed into the partially collapsed citadel, dust and rocks flew into the air. Its mucus-covered mandibles clicked and clacked in the air as it scented for its prey. This creature was like the ones before. However, it had a human-like face and eyes, which peered around the corners and under crevices, searching around for anything that showed a sign of life. Micah adjusted Nemala on his arm, pushing her closer to his body, then firmly tightened his grip on the petrified tree root overhead. But doing so caused a few large pieces to crumble and fall 20 or so feet down to the cobbled path below them. The centipede moved instantaneously. Once the first rock slapped the ground surface, the centipede moved, screeching and screaming as its dozens of barbed-covered legs slithered along the hard stone floor. It overturned a dozen more rocks before it grew enraged.
Show yourself, beastkin.
A deep masculine voice pierced the air as a plum of dark brown smoke shrouded the insect's body. From the waning cloud walked a rather handsome man. His body was large. His build was like Micah's, but his muscular structure was more obscure-shaped. Instead of two, there were four heavily muscled arms protruding from its upper torso. Nemala squinted her eyes and studied its face. He was handsome with dark green eyes and thick dark brown hair, aside from his irregular-shaped mouth that split from ear to ear, allowing its mandibles to extrude and retract at will.
Show yourself, beastkin. 2 of my kin have been slain, so you shall atone for this.
Nemala and Micah shared silent glances, both piecing together untold truths as they watched the scene before them.
Must you always be so brash?
Purred a seductive voice from the shadows. The male turned swiftly, punching his fists through the stone wall, barely missing the cat demon as she slinked further into the shadows. He withdrew his fist from the large crater, using his other hands to knock off the rubble and dust from his arms, stomping as he walked further into the deserted city, continuously yelling and demanding the cat beast to stop hiding.
For the 2 lives you've taken, my kin will slay 20 of yours.
Miski hissed as she leaped down from her hidden perch. Her long black tail slapped the ground like a whip. The killing intent she exuded was just as sinister, if not more, than the large male in front of her.
You will do no such thing, you bug.
Her face was now morphed into a more beastly form. Fangs swished out of her mouth as she aimed her long claws in his direction. The male smiled or sneered. Nemala couldn't tell which it was because of the mandibles splitting his mouth apart.
I'm sure the death of my kindred means nothing to you, beastkin. But it was my duty to handle them.
I wasn't the one that took those hags' irrelevant little lives.
Then the one that did will die by my fist.
At the male's proclamation, Nemala and Micah flew down towards the feuding duo. Nemala stood to the side near Miski, and Micah positioned himself closer to the insectoid male. Their abrupt entrance went unnoticed. The insectoid continued speaking to Miski as if their presence was beneath him to speak upon. But his eyes fell to Nemala, periodically peering at her with avid curiosity. Micah's possessive instinct caused him to spread his wings out, blocking the male's view of Nemala. But the insectoid male cut his eyes and carried on talking.
Will you or will you not hand over the perpetrators?
Micah tilted his head and motioned for Nemala to step back. Once he felt she was at a safe enough distance, Micah unfurled his wings and unleashed his beastly form. Wispy swirls of power swirled and danced over his golden scaled skin.
Look no further. I stand before you.
Micah's deep voice sent a shiver of excitement down Nemala's spine. The 8-armed warrior was indeed big and no doubt ferocious. But there was no comparison to the immensity of Micah's powerful aura. To all of their surprise, the male lunged forward without a word. Two of his arms clamped down on the potagium of Micah's wings, while his other four fists punched and jabbed at Micah with incredible speed and accuracy. Micah was caught off guard, costing him several wicked blows to his spleen and solar plexus. With so many fists barreling towards his vital points, his ability to block and parry was limited. Micah summoned forth his arrow. Sensing the killing intent of his foe, he swiftly engaged all his scales, turning his skin into living armor. When the insectoid's fists came down upon the dagger tips of Micah's scales, blood and flesh were ripped from its bone. The insectoid screamed and yelled as it quickly pulled its mangled hands away.
You abomination! How dare you stand before me? Know your place.
Micah shot the male a cocky grin as he pulled chunks of flesh from the tips of his chest scales. Then, tossed the bloody bits down onto the dust-covered ground. The metallic glint of a sword's hilt caught his attention from his peripheral vision. So Micah rolled forward, grasping the cold, hard metal within the palm of his hand. Just as the insectoid crashed his bloody fist down where Micah once stood, the insectoid screeched and again lunged, but failed to notice the long sword now in Micah's possession. Swooping, the large weapon swung down, striking the insect warrior across its chest. The opposition stumbled backward, its 8 hands protecting its blood-seeping wound. Micah raised the sword high in the air for another blow. But Miski's voice called out to them.
Is that any way to treat our nephew?
The insectoid grunted a sound of disgust. His dark green eyes slanted as he stepped further away from Micah, no longer willing to engage him in battle. He winced.
This abomination is no kin of mine.
The male spat onto the floor, then turned away from the trio, found himself a broken stone, and sat upon it while nursing its wound. Only when the insectoid's killing intent diminished did Micah drop his guard, but still refused to relinquish the sword.
Isn't this lovely, all of us together? Like this?
Miski's tail slapped the ground excitedly as the two males gave each other death stares from the opposite sides of the path. Nemala was fed up with the drawn-out theatrics and muttered a short incantation under her breath. Miski yelped as the tip of her tail was licked by the searing heat of Nemala's starfire. The insectoid male braced the wound on its chest as he pained from laughing aloud.
Finally, someone can put you in your place, sister.
Miski shot Nemala a salacious glare, then tucked her smoldering tail into the crevice of her hands.
I'm beginning to rethink my feelings towards you.
Nemala shrugged and walked closer to Micah. Likewise. Intruders. Back at the cave, the Fire Tribe women were feeling restless. The food supply was dwindling down, and several of the women had gotten hurt the last time they attempted to forage beyond the falls without Nemala. Minno's stomach growled as she stuck a long branch into the funny-smelling pool of water by the southern side of the cave. The grey-haired elder had warned her not to venture this deep within the caves, but Minno didn't heed her warning. The youngling had become more adventurous since leaving the prison. Minno was always itching to go as far as her little legs would take her. Plus, she was inquisitive, fueled by her avid curiosity and ever-growing hunger. Minno sniffed the air. Her little nose flared when the smell of roasted meat wafted from the tunnel ahead. Her dark eyes twinkled at the thought of eating cooked meat. But unfortunately, they couldn't risk the smoke leading the winged demons to the cave, so the women were reduced to consuming raw fish, frog, and lotus leaves. So onwards, her little feet carried her. Before long, the temperature grew warmer. Sweat dripped from the scarlet plaits on her head. The surrounding walls seemed to move and groaned from the rising temperatures.
Ouch!
She winced as a red glowing rock burned the tip of her toe. Minno stopped and looked backward. The path whence she came was dark and foreboding. She shook just now, realizing that she had made a terrible mistake. So she kept moving forward towards the light, making sure to only touch the cold rocks that didn't shine red. Minno sniffed again. The smell was stronger now, but less pleasant. As she rounded the bend, Minno stood petrified. The horrible sight before her froze her in a state of shock. There was a large dark room. At its center was a circular pool of lava. A heaping mound of corpses set off to the side. There were winged demons here. Minnow ducked down and hid behind a boulder similar in size to her frame. Sploosh! The lava within the pool bubbled and boiled as a large winged angel threw the corpse of a flightless man into it. Minnow gagged. The appetizing smell of meat was the smoldering flesh of her kindred.
Hurry and pull the last batch out. If you let the bodies sit too long, the diamonds come out muddy.
Squawked a demon with black wings and beady black eyes.
Yeah. Don't fucking rush me, Crow. Where the Templar priest will not only allow on her demon quota, he will be missing a jewel caster as well.
Squawked the smaller man with mangled brown wings. Minnow wiped her face with the back of her pale hand. It was too hot here. She could barely breathe. Waves of heat wrinkled and swirled in the air ahead of her. But she rubbed her eyes and looked for dark places to keep hiding. The youngling was smart enough to stick to the shadows. She knew that if she was caught, there would be no escaping. On the adjacent side of the room was another tunnel. Where it led, she did not know. But anywhere would be better than here. The youngling twisted the bottom of her gown in between her sweat-drenched hands. And at the count of 3, she ran as fast as she could. The brown-winged man spun around as something moved in his peripheral vision.
Did you see that?
The crow beside him shrugged.
Ow. No, come on. Don't get getting outspoken, when. For hurry, I can still get Laddie Parakeet to suckle me cock for a few wakens, Tony.
The wren shook his head and tossed another flightless corpse into the lava pool. Just as Minnow fled deeper into the tunnel ahead. Minnow ran and ran. Right, then left. When that tunnel led to a dead end, she climbed upwards. Her face was a mess. Soot and dirt tinted her pale skin blue. And her little hands and feet were bloody and scarred as she pulled her body through the tight cracks and rocky nooks. But soon, she grew tired. Her little body had been pushed to its limits. She rubbed her dirt-streaked face, curled her body into the fetal position, and wept. Stone heart. Boom boom boom, the walls around Minnow shook and rumbled. Even so, her body laid still. For in the place of dreams, there was no hunger or pain. Boom. The small cavern where she rested was broken open.
What is that?
I'm not sure.
Someone run and get a lantern.
Is that a person?
Hurry to get the shift manager.
No, you dummy, hush up, it's one of our kind. By the grace of the Father, it's a female youngling.
I haven't seen one in over 7 years.
Minnow's limp body was gently pulled from the crevice. The miners cradled the frail babe's body with reverence. Each of them gently supported her head and neck. Her bony little arms hung aimlessly to the side as she was handed off from one miner to another.
Support her head and pass her off.
The first few males screamed down the line. They worked as swiftly as possible to remove the youngling from the soot-filled mine. Their rough, calloused hands trembled as they passed her cold, lifeless body along. For it had been years since many of them had seen a youngling. And a female babe was a long-forgotten myth for some. When Minnow was placed in one of the oldest miner's hands, he found himself unable to let the little one go. Goddard stroked her sunken cheek gently, then placed his weather-worn face against hers, cherishing and mourning the loss of the youngling's life. But Minnow's face wrinkled as the older man's stinky beard tickled her nostrils.
Did she just move?
Questioned Luke. The young miner tapped Goddard on the shoulder, frantically gesturing for him to look at the youngling's face.
Do that thing with your beard again.
Goddard's heart fluttered in trepidation. But he did as Luke instructed and, by the father, the babe's face scrunched up.
Did you see that?
gasped several other miners that encircled the older male. Godard's eyes filled with tears. As he watched the deep-set, wrinkles form along the top of the young girl's brow. When he rubbed his beard over her nose for the third time, her lips pouted out a bit as if she would cry. But their joy was short-lived. Her facial muscles quickly relaxed, and she once again laid deathly still. But Godard could feel the youngling's faint pulse of life. With a silent prayer to the Father, Godard whispered his oath.
Even if it cost me my last breath, this youngling in my arms shall live.
Must we go over this again? How many times? Will I need to repeat myself?
Miski huffed while gingerly stroking her singed tail between her thumb and index finger. Micah was flustered, which meant his wings fluttered with a nervous twitch. Nemala watched him silently wear grooves into the stone path as he repeatedly walked back and forth, lost in his thoughts. Micah stopped, turned his body as if he was going to speak, but another thought crossed his mind, causing him to pace once again.
What part don't you understand, abomination?
The gruff voice of the insectoid made Nemala cut her eyes at him with disapproval.
Why are you still here?
Micah barked back at the male. But the insectoid didn't respond. Instead, he simply folded all 8 of his arms and readjusted his position on his stone seat, allowing his interest to drift to Nemala every so often. Miski was all smiles while grooming herself, perched high on the roof of a dilapidated home.
I hate to say it, but for once, my brother is right.
The insectoid rolled his eyes but remained silent.
You are our nephew, presumed lost, or killed many moons ago. Now found yada, yada. Prophecy foretold. Blah, blah, the winged wench is your evil grandmother. We thought you were dead. All hail, the prodigal king.
With an exhausted breath, Miski rolled over. She stretched her long honey-colored legs and then jumped down to the dust-covered path below.
Maybe it's because you're dim-witted. The winged wench tossed his egg from the nest.
The insectoid nodded in agreement, for he, too, thought Micah dumb. Nemala rubbed her temples. No one in this fate-forsaken cavern had a lick of sense. Micah's ignorance was understandable. 1 minute, the winged mother is the god he prayed to. Now she's a vile, twisted hag hell-bent on killing him. To top it off, he also happened to be her grandson. At least, that's what Nemala understood from Miski's vague explanation.
But why does the winged mother want to kill me?
Miski's face lit up. She was enjoying toying with Micah's emotions. But Nemala was annoyed by her antics. This had absolutely nothing to do with her. And there was no telling how the females were faring, with her gone way past the days of her promise to return. So she walked over to Miski and abruptly put an end to her little game of cat and mouse. You said Micah is the one who is prophesied. The one who will reclaim the city of ruins. Miski frowned at Nemala, purring out a long, drawn-out yes. Then can he do as he pleases with this? Nemala swiveled around, pointing to the empty city around them. Miski rolled her eyes and purred again.
Yes.
With that, Nemala formulated a plan. Then walked to Micah's side. Since this is your city, I'll ask you. Can I bring the Fire Tribe females here? Micah was shocked. Not once had Nemala spoken about herself or her origins. He gripped the back of his neck, annoyed with himself for not realizing it sooner. By the fates, the flightless females could escape the Imperial dungeon because of her.
Of course.
Micah stuttered. His tanned face flushed red with embarrassment. Then I'll be off. Nemala turned to leave, causing the insectoid and Micah to abruptly stand and block her way. Nemala eyed both of the men wearily. What? The insectoid fumbled all 8 of his hands, then bit out.
The forest isn't safe for you to traverse alone. Since the blood of my kin has been spilled, the others will surely go hunting tonight. It will be a massacre come dawn.
All the more reason for me to hurry back to my people. Nemala pushed past him and continued onwards to the tunnel ahead. This time it was Micah that blocked her path, his large wings shrouded over them, granting them a sliver of privacy. He hugged the mysterious woman before him, pressing her firmly against his hard, warm chest. Every fiber of his being wanted to beg her not to go. But if the winged mother was after him, staying by his side would only put her in the line of fire. It wasn't safe for him to leave the sanctum of the City of Ruins. At least not until he had all the facts.
If it pleases you, the city and any of its structures are yours to occupy upon your return. I will do what I can to make it more hospitable for you and your people.
Micah uttered his last word cautiously, too afraid to ask Nemala if she would stay around after settling the flightless into their new home.
At least take a sword or a weapon.
Micah gestured towards an impressive pile of artillery sitting in the city square. Nemala's eyes swept over the heaping pile of iron and steel swords until her gaze fixed upon a sharpened staff resting underneath them all. I'll take you up on that offer. Many thanks, I must go now. Micah clenched his fist but decided against holding her up any further. For he had no right nor any claim over her.
If you are going only to venture back, I will accompany you.
Both Nemala and Micah cocked their heads at the insectoid's suggestion. A set of his arms shrugged as he purposely bumped Micah out of his way.
What? It makes the most sense. I can protect you. My kin won't attack one of their own. But if we come across lower beings, then even I won't be able to talk my way out of an altercation.
Lower beings?
Yes, kin who no longer have mana in their soul gems revert to their primal forms. For they can no longer speak or walk on two legs.
The insectoid scratched his rugged face with one of his hands.
It doesn't happen immediately, though. They slowly descend into full beast. That evil winged wench would have it no other way.
Nemala could feel her heart thumping erratically within her chest at the mention of a soul gem. But why? She had never heard of such a thing until now. Could you tell me more about these soul gems if I allow you to come with me? Nemala looked at the insectoid with expectancy. Micah had found his truths. Now it was Nemala's turn to discover hers. Love and lies. The journey back to the lagoon cave was tedious. The pair had very little time to breathe, let alone discuss soul gems. For even with the fighting prowess of the insectoid, many of the foes they came up against were hard to defeat. Be it not for their increase in numbers, Nemala would have collapsed before long. The insectoid lurched over, panting hard as he wiped the blood and sweat from his face.
By the Father, I've never seen so many lower beings.
Nemala slumped down by a nearby tree, gently stroking the alpha wolf at her side. But didn't you say it would be like this?
For fuck's sake, no. 1 or 2 lower beings were expected. But this has to be the 11th or so.
He kicked the corpse of a large lizard with the side of his foot.
These fuckers just keep coming.
Nemala eyed the discarded creatures that lay slaughtered around them. The spider I encountered earlier still had, well, a partial face. The man eyed her silently, then looked away.
That was probably one of the lower beings I lost track of.
Then, with a swift gesture, he cracked his back.
Its trail went cold over the last few moons. As the eldest, it's my responsibility to end the life of our kindred that has descended into madness. I know I acted an ass before. But I thank you for ending her suffering.
Nemala silently contemplated. Maybe the rugged brute before her was more than just a thick-headed warrior.
I've seen many strange things. But never have I seen a lower being act like that.
The insectoid pointed at the large wolf resting its head upon her lap. Nemala was also confused by the wolf's attachment to her. Her heart pained as she tenderly rubbed the scarred muzzle of the alpha. The tips of her fingers gingerly traced over its angry, inflamed wounds. Saddened that the pack of 10 had dwindled to the 4 wolves sitting beside her. Wolf? The beast's ears perked up slightly, but it stubbornly refused to leave the comfort of her lap. So Nemala cradled his head within her palms. You've done well, strong wolf. Nemala glanced up and gestured to the 4 other wounded canines to come to her as well. Slowly, each of them limped their way over. I am grateful to you all. For whatever reason, you find yourselves drawn to me. But you can rest now. You will only be hurt if you continue with me. Nemala rubbed the heads of every loyal wolf before rising to stand. You are a fierce and loyal leader. But your true family needs you now. So I shall name you Zhen as proof of our friendship. Remember this, strong wolf. Tend to your pack. With a kiss, Nemala said her goodbyes to the silver wolves and continued making her way back to the lagoon cave. The insectoid watched the strange woman. She was like nothing he had ever encountered. Nothing like the fire tribe females, for her hair wasn't red like molten rock. Instead, it was a mixture of beige and browns. His eyes roamed over her dark skin. Even her skin was different. Everything about her reminded him of fertile earth.
From what mother do you hail, woman?
Nemala jumped over a moss-covered stump, then looked back at the 8-armed male. Mother?
Yes, who is your kin?
The golden orb had just about reached its highest point. But the dark forest was still shrouded in the dim morning light. Nemala's violet eyes stared at the precarious male behind her. His facial structure was crude, similar to Micah's, if not for his dark hair and garish mandibles. Now that I look at you, I can see a familial resemblance. The male made a gagging noise, then stomped past Nemala, kicking the damp moss and fallen leaves as he marched eastwards.
Is that your way of avoiding my question?
He was right. Nemala was purposely avoiding his question. He may be aiding her for now, but she wasn't certain the insectoid could be trusted with more than he already knew.
You can't be from the fire tribe.
Because my hair is brown. The insectoid chuckled in amusement.
I see you're much quicker to catch on to things compared to.
Nemala cut her eyes at him, daring him to utter another word. But suddenly went silent when an unsettling feeling washed over her. The insectoid also took notice. 4 of his 8 arms rose defensively.
What? What do you sense?
He whispered to Nemala. Nemala pointed to the water's edge. The male looked but saw nothing until his eyes focused on the greenish-brown creature, camouflaged perfectly against the duckweeds. This lower being was unlike the ones they encountered earlier. The being before them still had small remnants of its consciousness. The sound of slurping of viscera and meat separating from bone caused Nemala's stomach to turn. The being's fur and tusk were dripping with the bloody entrails of whatever or whoever's unfortunate soul it had preyed on.
A boar beast,
mouthed the insectoid male.
From the looks of it, he just started descending into madness.
Nemala's throat tightened at the thought of the women or younglings being devoured. Damn it, she angrily berated herself. She truly believed the woman would be safe without her. But she had traveled longer than intended. Nemala pointed to the boar beast's hands and feet. It still has human-like appendages. The insectoid clicked his tongue.
That means this fucker will be held to take down.
With a nod, Nemala readied herself, quietly positioning herself to the beast's flank. Their goal was to ambush the lower being. Catching it off guard was their only chance of defeating it. Once Nemala was in place, the insectoid hurtled forward. 4 of his fists pounded the creature mercilessly, while his other 2 arms firmly pushed the boar beast down into the muddy embankment. Nemala swooped in next, stabbing the slicing at its neck with a sharpened wooden spear. Rah! The boar beast bellowed. Its humongous muscular arms were blocking and evading every other defensive strike.
You die, I kill.
The beast screamed before it snatched the insectoid by its neck and tossed him into the water like a rag doll. Nemala jabbed the spear at the beast again, sinking the sharpened tip deep into the gap between its ribs. It stumbled forward but didn't falter. It seemed more enraged. Then, whoosh! It punched its meaty fist out, aiming for Nemala's face. but missed. The boar beast may have had the advantage of strength, but she had agility. While the boar's attention was centered on Nemala, the insectoid waded closer towards the shore. When the boar beast was close enough, all 8 of his hands lashed out and gripped the boar's ankles, tugging the behemoth into the lagoon's murky green water. Nemala pushed off the base of a tree nearby, using her leg strength to increase the momentum of her strike. Splash! Nemala gripped the spear between her hands, then uttered a short incantation. The words instinctively rolled off the tip of her tongue. Swirls of energy wrapped around the wooden spear, reinforcing it with her mana. Nemala jabbed down with all her strength, stabbing the boar beast through. The water beneath his impaled body quickly turned red. Whoosh, splash.
Fuck yeah.
The insectoid screamed victoriously. Nemala folded her arms and shook her head in disapproval.
What? Was that not exhilarating?
Come, let's hurry and get them. The journey back will be hard. When Nemala entered the cave, the atmosphere was sour. When she left, the females were full of life and showing signs of improvement. But the women before her looked like the slaves she met in the imperial jails.
It smells funny here.
The insectoid clicked its mandibles, scenting the unfamiliar smells in the air. When the women noticed him, they screamed and fled to the back of the cave. Nemala had to coax them out slowly, slapping the insectoid on the back of his head to prove he posed no danger. Slowly, the women came from their hiding places, eyeing the 8-armed male with doubtful glances. Come. Come, this oaf is simply here to help guide you to your new home. Home. The women's pale faces brightened at the mention of the word. Yes, I've found a place for you all. Everyone wailed in excitement. Some cried tears of joy, while others hugged and danced in jubilation. Nemala looked around the dark cave for the small youngling she'd grown fond of. She looked at Virilla, but the little one quickly hid behind the grey-haired elder as if she had done something wrong. Nemala's heart quickened. Where is Minnow? Everyone in the cave immediately froze in place. Their laughter and cries of jubilation were now replaced with fear. Nemala spun around her eyes, berating everyone within the hollow chamber. Where is Minnow? This time, her voice was laced with power and authority. Her lilac eyes trembled as glittering sparks ignited from her hands. The insectoid beside her slowly backed away as her killing intent spread throughout the room. The grey-haired elder shuffled forward, bending her head in supplication as she wailed.
Dwind demons took her. While you were gone, they came.
Nemala's body convulsed. No, this couldn't be. I have only been gone a few days. Nemala uttered under her breath. How could this have happened? Nemala grasped the grey-haired elder by her shoulders, shaking the feeble woman so hard that a thumb-sized bruise began to form on the elder's pale arms.
You are hurting me.
The elder cried out. Tora and the insectoid stepped forward. It took 3 of his arms to pry Nemala's hands from the woman's arm. Tell me how and why she was the only one taken. All the females in the cave looked at the floor. Their shameful expression made Nemala's stomach roll. Was she truly taken, or did you serve her up? Nemala spat with indignation. The Fire Tribe women were behaving strangely, causing her to think the worst. Tora stepped forward, but the grey-haired elder quickly rose from the floor, blocking her path.
It is my fault I was not watching her.
She hurriedly shouted out.
Minnow has always been inquisitive. This time, she wandered just a little too far and was found by Dwind demons. I could not risk leading them back to the girls, so I hid and let them take her.
Nemala punched her fist against the cold stone wall of the cavern, leaving a deep fissure that reached from the ceiling to the base of the cave. Her heart was aching. Minnow didn't deserve that. Only the fates know what they were doing to such an innocent babe. Piss, get your shit and let's go. Nemala shoved her way past the women blocking her way and walked out of the cave with her head hanging low. Their long procession ventured through the dark forest in silence. Passing through a small ridge, through thorny thickets, and into the damp, muddy trenches. The group didn't encounter any lower beings or avians on their way back to the City of Ruins. The violent, dark aura radiating from Nemala was probably scaring the lower beings away. The insectoid gripped the back of his neck, uncomfortable with the painful silence. Perturbed by the oppressing amount of power Nemala was exuding. Originally, his goal was to travel with the strange brown female and trick her into mating with him. Then he would use that against Micah as a way to defeat him mentally. But with the sheer amount of power she shed from her emotional imbalance meant that even he was no match for her.
Fuck. This is not what I planned. Maybe I should just go.
Will you not be staying with us?
A soft female voice questioned. The insectoids pivoted to his right, clicking his mandibles incessantly. The fragrant scent of lemongrass and marigold flooded his sensory glands. His chest and arm muscles tightened when the female spoke again.
Will we be safe if you're not there?
By the fates, this woman's voice would be his undoing. He clenched his eyes shut. If she smelled this good and sounded this great. He was afraid seeing her would cause his instinctual urges to take over.
Are you all right?
Her smooth, warm hand touched the skin of his shoulders, causing the slit of his groin pouch to rupture. His two engorged penis tentacles twisted and writhed, seeking the warm, wet walls of a cunt. The insectoid clenched his teeth and squeezed his eyes shut tighter.
Woman, tell Nemala I will protect your group from the shadows.
Tora stepped back, alarmed by the insectoid's abrupt loudness.
Okay, I'll tell her right away.
Many thanks.
Before Tora could say another word, the male quickly scurried off. Love and Lies Part 2.
Water, water, bring the water in fast.
Goddard yelled to Luke as he diligently scrubbed the youngling's body clean. The obsidian soot wasn't harmful to old miners like them because they'd been around it long enough to grow immunity. But for such a young babe to be exposed to such a large quantity of toxins had them racing against time.
How long do you think this wee thing had been in there?
Questioned a miner lingering around Goddard's bunk bed.
Who knows? Do you think there are other females hidden in the mines?
Goddard tried to focus harder, dabbing and softly scrubbing the little babe's skin, trying hard to not rub her skin raw.
She has to be around 3 or 4.
Goddard gave Luke an incredulous stare, prompting him to take action.
Fellas, let's give the elder some room. If we draw too much attention, the shift managers will notice the youngling and steal her away.
Everyone dispersed quickly. For much of their hope resided in Goddard's ability to save the little female lying unconscious in his bed.
Many thanks, boy. Many thanks.
Goddard shot his hand into the air, waving the young man over.
Wash your hands and help me scrub her. She will never wake up. If we do not hurry. And get this suit off her skin. Pass me that scrap of rack. I need to get the soot from under her nails.
Luke silently passed the older man a scrap of cloth but kept focused on his task of washing the little one's hair. They had already used over months' worth of their water rations on the youngling. But many other miners had stepped up and offered their shares as well.
Cough, cough.
Both of the men's eyes widened when the youngling gasped for air.
Sit her up slowly. Pat her back.
Commanded Goddard as a wide-toothed grin spread across the old male's face. The deep wrinkles and craters of his face deepened as he watched the young child in wide-eyed wonder.
You are okay, little one. This old man will protect you.
Minnow turned her head looking around the dimly lit room. Her red eyes stung a bit as she scrubbed them with the back of her pale little hands. At first, she was frightened hearing the big scary males' voices. But when she noticed they didn't have wings, her little eyes wept even harder.
Hush, hush, little one, we will hide you away here, but you must keep as quiet as you can.
Minna wiped the sticky string of snot from her nose and shook her head in understanding.
Welcome to the City of Ruins.
Micah put on his best smile as the group of Fire Tribe women looked at him with utter disdain and suspicion. The women huddled together, forming a tight mass of fiery red hair, which caused Nemala's rich brown skin to stand out even more. Micah looked Nemala's way, but she pivoted to face the fearful group of females. I know what you all may be thinking. But you have nothing to fear from him. He has offered you this place as a refuge. Find a place to call your own and settle down for the coming night. At the utterance of her last words, Nemala stormed off. Micah looked at the insectoid, but even he simply shrugged and wandered off too, leaving Micah standing there dazed and confused. Boom! 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 The miner's hammer hit the cavern wall with a mighty force. All of them moving in tandem with like-minded determination. Gentry scratched his head while flipping the page over on his mining schedule. His men were at least 2 weeks ahead of their goal. Gentry couldn't figure out what had his men all riled up. His team never slacked off, meaning they usually got extra incentives. Ale, wig gums for the whorehouses, or little small perks of some sort. But never had he seen them work so hard like this. Oh, yelled one miner when the hilt of his hammer broke off, striking him in the shin. Gentry ran over, kneeling beside his worker as he assessed his wounds.
Look here, you all. I don't know why you're pushing yourselves this hard, but nothing good will come of it.
Gentry raised his voice so that everyone in Tunnel 27 could hear him. But the men simply eyed their fallen comrade with still faces. None of them uttered a sound. Gentry clicked his tongue and gestured for the miner beside him to take the injured male to the dormitories.
Where is Goddard?
Gentry shouted out. If the men didn't speak up, he would have to talk to the eldest. Something was going on, and Gentry was determined to get to the bottom of it. Heat! Heat! Swoosh! Nemala took a deep breath before swinging the staff down hard. Heat! She swung it again, this time twirling it around her head, then jabbing the empty space behind her.
Nemala.
Heat, heat. Nemala swung the staff again, this time stabbing the ground, impaling her invisible opponent.
Nemala.
This time Micah stood in front of her. But Nemala was so entranced with her training that she didn't notice him. Wham! Micah raised his fist, grabbing the wooden staff with the palm of his hand. The force of the strike was so great that a faint wisp of smoke rose from Micah's wound. Nemala staggered forward, suddenly realizing that she had harmed him. Oh, by the fates! I didn't mean to hit you. She hurriedly dropped the staff and sought out Micah's bruised hand, cradling his large fist against the softness of her bosom. Micah's throat muscles bobbed up and down as the plush flesh of her brown breast pressed against the back of his hand.
Don't fret over this small thing. Tell me, what has you so angry?
Nemala wiped the sweat from her brow and took the water satchel Micah extended out towards her, drinking the lukewarm water in a hurried gulp. After quenching her thirst, she and Micah sat upon the stone ledge. Then she relayed what happened back at the cave lagoon. I blame myself. Nemala kicked the greyish-brown rubble near her foot. Micah could feel how heavy this burden was for Nemala. As a knight commander, there had been plenty of times he felt the loss of good men, especially in the throes of battle. It was never an easy thing as a leader. Losing a youngling, losing an innocent, was something she would carry with her for some time.
I cannot sit here and pretend to know what it feels like to lose a child. But I know loss, and like me, you're the type of leader that tries to carry every burden, every mistake, and failure by yourself. But you shouldn't.
Micah leaned forward, placing his thumb firmly under Nemala's chin, forcing her to look at him. The scruff of his beard was fuller now. Platinum blonde wisps of hair were easing their way towards his full pink lips. Nemala's pupils dilated and constricted as his supple lips gently descended upon hers. Nemala moaned into his mouth, relinquishing her stress and burdens to the dominance of his lips. After their kiss, both of them lingered there in silence, enjoying the companionship of each other's presence.
What would you have me do? How can I help you?
Micah's voice was full of sincerity and concern. Micah had decided that if he could no longer be a knight of the capital, he would pledge himself to her cause, becoming the knight and warrior that Nemala needed.
Are you saying the Avians came to the lagoon cave, or did they take her while she ventured out into the wilderness?
Micah questioned the frail grey-haired woman standing before him. But the elder refused to face him, answering only to Nemala. "Elder, Micah asked you a question." Nemala's voice was stern and commanding. She folded her arms and leaned into Micah as they sat by the warm fire. The women had built a fire pit with the sticks and timber the younglings found around the city. All of them had eaten and were content, warming themselves with the firelight in the city's central square. But the grey-haired elder pursed her lips and looked into the flame.
"I will not speak to that demon."
Miski was back in her beast form. Each time Nemala stroked the space between her ears, a low, rumbled growl vibrated her whiskers. For in her cat form was the only way the two got along. Purr, purr, purr. Micah's luminous golden eyes reflected the firelight as he nodded his head in agreement to whatever Miski had stated. He leaned his head down, then whispered something in Nemala's ear. She also agreed with Miski's judgment. The grey-haired elder was lying. But Nemala had no way of confirming how much she said was truth or fiction. "If I take you back to the Black Forest, can you show me where she was taken from?" Nemala questioned the older woman. But the grey-haired elder began to stammer and stutter, making excuses why there was no point in going back for the youngling.
"Losing Minu will forever cause a great scar upon my heart, but let us use her death as fuel towards our greater goal."
And what goal would that be?
Micah questioned the women wearily, but once again, he was ignored.
"With your help and your powers, Nemala, our tribe can be reunited and one day rise up against twin demons that enslaved us."
The grey-haired elder shook her hands in the air, rallying the other fire tribe women behind her. Nemala cut her eyes to the far corner in the distance, where she caught a glimpse of Tora and the insectoid slinking off into the shadows. Nemala jabbed Micah, gesturing for him to lean his ear down to her face. "If that giant bug hurts her, I will kill him." Micah chuckled at her remark.
"Just give me the word, and I'll end him myself."
When the fire tribe women were done shouting and ranting about, Nemala rose from her seat and walked to the center of the square, standing tall with her back to the flame. "Let me be clear. I am not your savior. Nor am I your champion." Everyone quieted down as Nemala ripped the air from their sails. "I helped you as I helped myself because I couldn't stand seeing you all be imprisoned and oppressed. But that does not mean I will make your plight my plight. Nor your war, my war. I will save the youngling after that. You and your people must decide your own futures."
"Is this because you have ridden the fat cock of a winged demon?"
Everyone gasped, as an elder that Nemala rarely heard speak dared to rebuke her. But Nemala chuckled at the older woman's bitter words. Nemala could see Micah's massive white wings fluttering about from her peripheral vision as he fought back his desire to speak out in her defense, but Nemala stood her ground and smiled. "Whether I ride his cock or stick it in every orifice on my body is of no concern to you. I will save the youngling and be done with it. Then I will also be done with you all."
"That is enough,"
shouted the grey-haired elder.
"Nemaglo, I apologize in her place. Our wounds run deep. You are right."
The old woman sighed as she squatted before Nemala as a gesture of submission.
"We took your help for granted. Please help us find the youngling. After that, we will learn to stand on our own 2 feet. Let us rest now, ladies, for the day has been long."
The fire tribe women dispersed from the city square at the elder's words, leaving Nemala, Micah and Miski behind.